Hi, y'all. This is Kristen Chenoweth.
Hi, I'm Gloria Stefan.
This is Sarah Bareilles.
Hi, I'm Patty Lapone.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda. You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
Welcome to another episode of the Theater Podcast. I'm your host, Alan Seals.
And I'm Jillian Hockman, joining remotely today.
And I love that you're joining remotely. You're actually in the middle of traveling, but you're calling in, which is ironic because the episode here with Tony Award-winning director Christopher Ashley was also done over the phone. He's currently on the West Coast at the Jolla Playhouse, where he's the artistic director, gearing up for Diana in the middle of rehearsals. He actually stepped out of rehearsal for an hour to give me the phone call, so I thank him very much for that. And just an incredible individual. Got his Broadway directorial start in '99. Has done like so many different genres and types of shows, some of which has a special place in your heart, right, Jillian?
Yes. Back in 2004, there was a show called All Shook Up, which was an Elvis jukebox musical that Christopher directed, and that was the show that made me fall in love with Broadway. He also did another show in 2007 called Xanadu, based on the 80s movie, which is another favorite of mine. And these were the shows that really kind of propelled me through my teenage years and made me fall in love with the art form. So we have Christopher Ashley to thank for my side of the podcast here, because he is the reason why I love Broadway.
He's done so many shows that I have been following for a long time, and then most recently Come From Away, and then Escape to Margaritaville. Come From Away, of course, the musical about 9/11, what happened in Gander, Newfoundland during 9/11, and now it's getting made into a movie, which I'm very excited about. But he was sort of, I guess, unintentionally cagey about details because there probably aren't that many yet.
Yeah, that happens a lot of times with musicals turning into movies, but fingers crossed we will get that soon.
It was interesting to me to hear him talk about, I guess, how directors get attached to shows, because I've talked more with producers, I guess, and producers seem to always have a director that they go to, or a group of directors that they know they can trust, they know they can go to, and early in your career, when you don't have that reputation, when you don't have those relationships with people, how do you get attached? And it seems like it's almost as hard of work to get cast to get hired as a director as it is to get cast as an actor in the same show.
Yeah, directing, especially when you're young, you need to build that reputation. And so some of the early shows he did had some questionable producers and creative sides attached to it, as he tells the story later. It's a great story. We won't spoil it for you here, though, but listen for the mafia.
and how to react to something unexpected in a hot tub.
How to react to a dead body. Somebody knows. Some experience.
So everybody, please enjoy this episode with Tony Award-winning director Christopher Ashley.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3.
Today's guest is a 3-time Tony nominee who won the Tony for Best Direction in Come From Away. So far, he's directed 9 shows on the Broadway stage, including some of my personal all-time favorites like All Shook Up, Memphis, and of course, Come From Away. He's directed feature films and is still the artistic director of the Jolla Playhouse. Christopher Ashley, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off, of course, where we always start off with this podcast, and I want to talk about your humble beginnings. Where did you grow up, and what kind of child were you?
Humble's the right word. I grew up in 17 different places before I went to college. So born in Chicago, lived in North Carolina, hadn't had a really thick accent as a little kid.
No kidding.
Upstate New York, Portugal, London, Michigan, Maine, pretty much all over.
Wow. So why did you move around so much?
My parents were young and just getting out of grad school, so I was and quickly divorced. So I was bopping around between postgraduate gigs, and my mom had a grant to be in Portugal for a couple of years. My dad did a teaching gig of trading professorships in London. So I pretty much followed my parents through their early career.
Wow. What part of North Carolina did you live in? I'm just curious because I lived there too.
Durham.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I went to college at NC State. Was Raleigh-Durham kid for about 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've Beth Level. We commiserated over our Raleigh experience. It was wonderful.
You don't need to commiserate with me. I had a fantastic time there.
I guess commiserate is the wrong word. I do like it, but sorry for all North Carolina friends listening right now. I am slightly glad I don't live there anymore. Anyway, so then you went to college. You went to college at Yale, but before we get to that, did you go to high school in a couple different places, or were you able to stick through high school in like all 4 years in one place?
Almost. So I went to a year of high school at this great place in Ann Arbor, Michigan called Community High. That was very kind of post-60s hippy-dippy. There was, I think the theater class was called People Piles. It was very get in touch with your, inner child. And then I spent 3 years at Andover.
Community High sounds like the title of a sitcom.
It would have been a really good one. The teachers smoked pot with the students in the fire halls. You could take as many classes at University of Michigan as you wanted as a high school student. So it was great for the self-motivated. And if you were a kid who liked to, smoke pot behind the gym, that was also a great place for you.
So I bet that answers some of my questions later about why you decided to stage Midsummer Night's Dream with all the set upside down. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that later on. So you went to Yale. You ended up attending Yale for math and English.
Yeah.
So what?
I did lots of theater there as well, but and I was committed to a hardcore academic education while I had the time in college. So I did both math and English, and also probably acted in and directed 15 or 16 shows when I was there.
Oh, so you started directing in college then?
I did. You could even back it up to high school. I think I directed 3 or 4 things when I was at Andover.
So when you were involved with these productions, why did directing speak to you more than acting? You said, you just mentioned a second ago you were acting too, but like, you did both, but which one, how did you know that directing was more for you?
I loved acting, and I still love the acting process. It's a lot of why I love making theater, but I was never a very good actor, sadly. I think if I had been a great actor, I might have tried to go down that road longer. But I was sort of always in my head, and even on stage, I think always trying to think about, okay, what should I be doing? What does this look like from the audience's point of view? I was sort of always thinking about the direction, even while I was in the scene. So it seemed wiser to put myself in that chair. It's also, there was like so much theater energy when I was at Yale. I mean, the Yale undergraduates are putting on plays in the dining halls and in the squash courts, and there's a real kind of precursor movement to a lot of the site-specific theater that's happening now, and that I love. There was just theater bursting out of every crevice on that college campus. So it was a really fun time to be thinking about directing and where can you put a play. I did a Hamlet in the library, the main library of the school. So that all the words, and all the books were just kind of coming off of the shelves, and that was incredible fun. And there was amazing people when I was an undergrad at Yale. Jodie Foster was there, and director Tina Landau, and Lisa Peterson, and Michael Cerveris was there when I was there. It was a really great group of people making theater.
What kind of show do you put in a squash court?
Probably 5 squash courts have been converted into little black box theaters where they have a little audience permanently set up in there. And a lot of times you'll do part of the show on the sort of floor, and what would normally be the visitor gallery is a second story staging. It actually is kind of perfect for Shakespeare, and it kind of looks like the original Globe a little bit in a micro way.
Wow. Well, I would have never. I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's it's a squash court is kind of a white box, but then you just paint the walls, and there you go.
I actually broke my wrist doing a production of the Scottish play, hurling myself from a second story viewing gallery down to the floor, and So I have both good and bad memories performing in squash courts.
Wow. What did you actually graduate with? Like, what degree?
English with a minor in math.
Okay, so you did follow through with that, and then do you feel like you are using that? I mean, and I guess I'm leading into a question of what sort of formal training did you get as a director?
I do think that math and music have an incredible amount in common. You know, it's amazing how many scientists and mathematicians are also amateur musicians. Like, there's a lot of, I think, sympathy between reading music and solving a math problem, actually. So I do think that that's really working on musicals keeps using some of my math skills. I also put myself through college and paid off my high school student loan debts by being a computer programmer. Although everything I knew about computer programming is in the trash heap now,
of
and
course.
every 10-year-old is a better computer programmer than I am now.
What languages did you learn?
I programmed in Fortran, Basic, Pascal, and COBOL.
Wow. Did you ever get as basic as assembly?
I do a little bit. I took a course, I think, in assembly language, and I was early for the hardcore geeks listening. I think I was one of the first people to learn C++, like very, very early days of C++, which is actually the only language that's still kind of people are still programming in, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, C++ is heavily
I remember when
used.
programs were, the Commodore PET was a personal computer, and you could put your program on a cassette tape, and that was how you stored it.
Oh, yeah. I took I think it was in elementary school. I did a summer school class of programming, and we would save on a cassette tape every afternoon when it was over. And somehow mine did save, and I lost my whole rocket ship program that I was making. So, and I still haven't recovered.
Maybe you're going to find it someday, and suddenly that'll be like the new video game off that cassette tape.
I don't even think it was a game. It was just learning, you change one variable and it affects your velocity. It's just things you do for kids. Anywho, okay, so you come out of Yale with an English degree and with the math on the side, and then how did you start getting into professional directing?
I was an intern at Playwrights Horizons in New York City for a year, and assistant director that year on Driving Miss Daisy, the first production, with Morgan Freeman and Dana Ivey and really amazing cast. So that was very formative for me. This was I got out of college in '86, so there was one of the early Drama League directors, which is a program that's still around and doing great. I had one of those NEA TCG directing fellowships to move around the country and meet people and see what they're up to and observe rehearsals. So I had a couple of years of grant-supported assistantships before I was directing on my own.
And so you were doing that, and how does that process work to become a director? Because I've always been curious about this, because as an actor, it's always very apparent. You are sent the script, and you go in, you hopefully learn your lines, you go in, you make your choices, and then you go in and hopefully you impress the director. But the director is already there, right? So how do you get there in the first place? How do you get chosen by who? Who chooses the director, and how does that happen?
So almost always it's the artistic director of the theater who's making the choice. If you have a strong relationship with the author on a new play, that's also often a route in. Often, if a director and a writer have gone to grad school together or something, that writer will help create the first opportunity for that director to direct in a professional context. But there's as many different routes into the director's seat as there are people. Whether you come through assistant directing, whether you come through writing, whether you come through acting and then have your first directing job, or just force of will. I mean, I do think the people who wind up in the profession are people who are incredibly tenacious and are able to tolerate working in, basements and squash courts for a while before it's actually a paying gig. Wow. And that was true for me too.
So yeah, you would call yourself a tenacious person?
I definitely think I get A+ for. I'm like Trump. I'm going to give myself an A+ for animation.
You have performed very bigly in your past. I can see that. Yes.
I try to perform bigly whenever possible.
So just enjoy your confefe and yes, perform bigly.
I was very much kind of multitasking. I worked at a bank for the first 3 years or so to continue to pay off loans.
No kidding.
A bank that no longer exists called Manufacturers Hanover, doing systems analysis for them. So I was, basically doing an internship during the day and then going to do computer programming at night.
Did you have to audition for the internship, or was it just like, we'll take anybody and see who's good?
That I would say, Playwrights Horizons at that point was quite voracious for interns to help keep the place going. So that wasn't it was a great match, but the door was kind of thrown wide open. Definitely all the Drama League and TCG. There's a lot of application process, and I actually love applications and test taking. So that was exactly well suited to me.
Wow. So then walk me through the process of how you got your first Broadway show, which was Voices in the Dark in '99, right?
Wow, you have the whole thing in front of you.
I did my research.
The first full-length show I did in New York was at an off-Broadway theater called the WPA, which had an amazing couple of decades of work. And it was a Larry L. King play called The Night Hank Williams Died. And I think I was 23 when I directed it.
Wow.
It got quite a nice Times review and moved to the Orpheum Theater for a commercial run. It was, I think, the show that was in the Orpheum right before Stomp took over the Orpheum for 3 decades.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit lucky. The first show I ever did was well received, had some enough of a life to help pay my rent for a couple of months. And then actually gave me a lot of injection of belief that that career was possible if you stick with it.
Right. And how from a financial standpoint, are directors, I guess the payment for a director, is that a pre-negotiated rate, or is it like we hear from actors, they'll get or for film actors, they get points based on, merchandise or box office sales or something. Is it the same with all creatives in the theater as well?
It's really not. Although maybe there's people who are getting points on their merchandise, but that's not me. In general, nonprofit theaters, regional theaters, off-Broadway theaters have a amount that they can pay, and they pay everybody the same, and there's really very little negotiation. As you start to move toward Broadway, there's more room for negotiation because, if you've earned your investor money back time and again, you start to be, I think worth a little bit more to the producers. But really, until you hit Broadway, there's very little negotiation. It's what's called favored nations, and you take what they have.
Wow. So then how did you get Voices in the Dark then in '99?
So I would say that the things that led there, I did a Paul Rudnick play called Jeffrey that was started again at the WPA and went on to the Minetta Lane and then kind of around the country, and we made a film of it with Patrick Stewart and Sigourney Weaver and Brian Batt from the original production on stage. So Jeffrey was a real turning point for me. And that was the same year I did Anna Devere Smith's first play, Fires in the Mirror, and a Claudia Schiffer play called Blown Sideways Through Life. So I started to kind of have a off-Broadway kind of profile, and that was, I think, what jumped me to Broadway for the first time in Voices in the Dark.
Nice.
Which was a thriller. Didn't have that much success when it opened, truthfully, but I had a really amazing time working on it with Judy Ivey, who's a fantastic actor, and the writer John Peelmeyer I really love. There was a moment late in the show that it all took place kind of in a cabin in the Adirondacks where, terrible things are happening in a thriller kind of a way. And there's a jacuzzi in the living room. And that there's a bad thing has happened in that jacuzzi, but the central character does not know that yet. And then late in the play, she opens the jacuzzi cover and, you imagine what she's seeing, and it's really terrible. So we're taking that moment, and we stop for a break. And one of the one of the investors, who I'm sure had a mafia past, comes up to me and says, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And he goes, "Listen, when you look in a jacuzzi and see a chopped up dead body, that's not the way you react." I was like, wow, I'm actually in the room with someone who really knows what it feels like to look at a chopped up dead body. So sometimes you never know where you're going to get your inspiration, or you're going to get truth checked.
I don't know how I would have reacted in that scene. I would have just gone like, oh, okay. So would you like to show us?
I just took notes. Although finally I realized, you've seen a lot of dead bodies, and actually this is her first. So I'm not sure how useful it is, but I was interested in his experience of opening jacuzzis.
That's funny. I wonder. I've always wondered too. Like the director, were you just connected with the investors? The investors just happened to be there. So I've interviewed Dori Berenstein as a producer on this podcast as well, and she's given me a lot of insight. I mean, the listeners an insight of what a producer does, and it sounds like the production team hires the director, hires the investors. But do you, as a director, get to say, I want this mafia guy to invest in this show, or do you just you take what you're handed?
I'm usually not picking the investors, although I do think over time you do develop a group of producers who are excited about your work and tend to jump on board whatever the project is. But it is really the lead producer's pick who are the investors more than the directors, even though I now have a field of people that have tended to work on the shows again and again.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious. So then you've got Voices in the Dark in 99, then in 2000, Rocky Horror Show. Yeah, and I guess, I don't know, would you call that a thriller? What kind of genre do you call Rocky Horror?
Science fiction transvestite rock concert. How's that? I was a huge Rocky Horror fan as a teenager. I would do the late night Saturday night. I'd bring my water pistol and my toast and my newspaper and my rice and do all the kind of talk shop backs at the screen. So I pitched myself so hard for that project when Jordan Roth started talking about doing it as a Broadway production, and had such an amazing time with that cast. Tom Hewitt was spectacular in the lead, and there was Daphne Rubin Vega and Joan Jett and Jared Emick and Alice Ripley, just like a fantastic Leah Delaria, this wonderful people. And we did Cavett as the narrator. So it was kind of a demented cast. And we were doing this, having such a good time. Raul Esparza was in the original cast of that show. And we went on to do 5 or 6 different things together. And it was running and had opened when 9/11 happened. So it shut down for a while, then kind of came back for a second wave of performances. And I was really worried that, the ridiculousness of the Rocky Horror Show was going to be badly suited to the moment of 9/11. What we actually found is people were so glad to get out of their homes, sit in a room with other people, and rediscover community together. That it played better than ever, after those events, which I think was a lot about how hungry people just were for art and community, regardless of what the story was.
That's really interesting. You said that one of the earliest episodes on this podcast here was I interviewed Nancy Opal, and she told the story of, actually, I can't remember if it was on mic. I think it might have been when we stopped recording. She told this great story about how Urinetown was supposed to open on 9/11. And obviously, they had a whole scene where they were going to they were throwing businessmen off a building, and they just shut it down. They cut that, they had to rework that whole scene days, within the days when theater all went dark. But then what she was saying was similar to what you just said, that when they were worried about attendance, but people, they wanted to get out of their house. They wanted to come together and just find something to laugh about again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we were also in the middle of Rocky Horror had already opened, and I was working on 3 Paul Rudnick one-acts down at Drama Department in the West Village, and it was about to open when 9/11 happened, and that too we had to really retool it because there was a a scene where one of the actors took the audience hostage, in the show, and it did not seem well suited to the moments after 9/11. So we reworked quite a few just moments to not be too triggering there.
Right. So then moving on to 2002, The Smell of a Kill. What was that one?
Smell of the Kill was a Michelle Lowe play. 3 women. Just pull that play back out. I actually think that play would, in some of the current conversation about gender in the kind of Me Too world, that play was very much a kind of 3 women's revenge fantasy against 3 husbands who are really not behaving well. And really smart, snappy play. I also had Claudia Schiffer in it, and through the various workshops and Broadway productions, Katie Finneran did one of them. Jessica Stone was in one of them. We had some really, really amazing actresses, and it was at the Helen Hayes, where I also went on to do Xanadu.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm trying to lead up to All Shook Up, which in 2005.
Excellent.
Yeah, All Shook Up was, I still listen to the soundtrack, actually. And that put Cheyenne Jackson on my personal radar. So if I follow him now, but I think personally, I think I got confused with Good Vibrations. Have you heard that?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So, the whole shaking thing, Good Vibrations, obviously the Beach Boys musical, confused with All Shook Up. And I think All Shook Up the people thought that was the Beach Boys musical, which, let's talk about box office, wasn't doing well. So I think All Shook Up suffered from that. But it's still...
Yeah, no, there was like many moments, like the kind of press response to how do they feel about jukebox musicals and musicals that exist, are built around a catalog. There's certainly been amazing instances. I think Jersey Boys is a beautiful, beautiful musical, and there's a bunch of ones that do this really, really well. But they're always a tough sell with the press as well, I would say. And I was really proud of that musical. Like you, that was really my introduction to Cheyenne, who is extraordinary, and I've worked with several times. It was one of my first shows with Joe DiPietro, who I'm working with right now. He also he wrote the book for All Shook Up. He went on to write, together with David Bryan, the book for Memphis, which I also directed, and they were very Tony awarded for that, the 2 of them. And we're all sitting in a room now. I just stepped away on rehearsals, on a break from rehearsals. We're in our final couple of days in the rehearsal hall on a new musical about Princess Diana.
Oh, no kidding. Are you able to tell us what it's called?
It's called Diana. It's a straightforward title. And it's very much about the kind of triangular marriage between Diana, Charles, and Camilla, who, Charles was in love with really even before he met Diana, but in those days, not in any way allowed to marry her, since she was already married with children, and not particularly highborn. And it's interesting about the impact that Diana has had on that family, that how much has changed since when Charles was making his decision, and now Harry can marry Meghan Markle, right? An American divorcee.
Wow, yeah. And so the rehearsals are happening in LA, right? La Jolla Playhouse?
In San Diego, at La Jolla Playhouse.
Oh, San Diego, yeah.
From my office, and in fact, all the actors just left on their lunch break, so I see dancer legs leaving in my window, because my office is right next to the rehearsal room.
So this is a good segue to talk about La Jolla. You were appointed artistic director in 2007, so that was while Xanadu was on Broadway as well. And you were, I assume, were based out of New York until that point, and then how did the La Jolla come about?
So they were looking for an artistic director. Des McAnuff had been the artistic director at the Playhouse for most of 25 years. Really, he took 2 different stints with Michael Greif and Annie Hamburger here in the middle. And when Des left the first time in the 90s, I actually applied for the job because I've always been fascinated by La Jolla Playhouse. I love their history. It really started out, Gregory Peck and Dorothy McGuire kind of started it in the 40s as a place for movie stars to, come and do real acting on their summer breaks from shooting movies. And the kind of history of musicals that would go on to like have huge impact on the nation, like Jersey Boys, like Tommy, the early modern Millie started here, and in my time, Come From Away and Memphis, and I think 30 some shows have moved from the Playhouse to Broadway. So the mix of those shows that are going to have big impact, and also this very restless, adventurous kind of programming, just the new plays and the really adventurous, formally unexpected plays that have happened here through the years. I really like that combination. Plus, it's a beautiful place to be. I'm talking to you now, and there's wind whispering through the palm trees.
Do you enjoy living in San Diego more than New York?
The more than is a hard question, because I have incredible love for New York as well. And I lived there, I think, 20 years before I came out to La Jolla. So I enjoy both in my life. But La Jolla is an extraordinary place. And I guess we're talking in end of January, beginning of February. And it's being here rehearsing a new musical as opposed to being in the middle of the polar vortex is fantastic.
You mean you don't like single digits with wind chill in the -20s?
I'm not such a fan. Although I am amazed at, if you live in San Diego, you would think, given the fact that it's basically beautiful almost every day, that weather would cease to be a subject. No, everyone talks about weather all the time in San Diego, constantly, like the tiniest little weather variation, and everyone's talking about it. And you want to go like, why are you talking about the weather? You have none. There is no weather in San Diego. It's always nice. But I think it's a little bit to keep reminding yourself, hey, we're lucky enough to live in paradise.
Yeah, well, it sounds phenomenal. I've never actually been to San Diego. I've been to the Bay Area, San Francisco many times, LA several times, but San Diego is still on my list. So when I come out there,
you have an open invitation. You could come to early preview of Diana and check it out.
All right. When do they go into previews?
We're like 3 weeks out.
Oh wow. Okay. Maybe I can maybe swing a trip out. We can do some in-person stuff. I'll see what I can do. I appreciate that. So still speaking about La Jolla, and now being the artistic director, how does an artistic director? How do you choose your lineup? How do you choose the season?
So have an amazing staff, director of new play development and producing director, and I guess about 5 or 6 people in the artistic department who read everything and see everything in the country, which I really admire. I have a real interest and love for new plays and musicals. So in the last 5 years, everything has been either a world premiere or a second production where the authors are also working on it. So we've really put our resources towards the development of the new and trying to be a cradle for the birth of a new show, and exploring artists' voices who hopefully come back again and again. Really like trying to be a loyal home to extraordinary artists is a real priority for me. And we do only 6 shows a year on subscription. So that's tended to be 2 musicals and 4 new plays. And we've got beautiful spaces. We have 4 performance spaces. And it's started as a summer theater, but now year round. So it's kind of a jigsaw puzzle of figuring out what's the shape of our season and what new authors do I think have something vital to say to the world right this minute. And, trying to create a mix of plays, musicals, big, small, family, politics, serious, goofy, like trying to make sure that every time an audience member walks in the door, they have a really new experience of some kind.
So the physical process to you, I pictured like a bunch of Post-it notes all over the wall with your yeses, nos, and maybes.
I'm sadly very old school. There's not enough computers in the mix, which is funny for someone who started out as a computer programmer.
Yeah, right.
Very 3x5 cards on a cork board, kind of playing around with the grid. And probably we start out with, we get, I want to say 5,000 projects pitched our way.
Wow.
During the course of season planning. And we kind of boil those down to 80 or 100 projects that seem, the most interesting to us. And then there's a excruciating winnowing process down to just 6 that we'll actually do. That's the hardest thing programming is incredible fun in every way except you have to say no thousands of times for every one time you can say yes. And that's frustrating.
Well, that sounds like everything in this business, really. I mean, casting directors and I guess investors are carefully picking what they want to invest in as well. Is the Playhouse, is it publicly funded or you take private investment?
It is a nonprofit, 501c3, very much on the philanthropic, supported by a mix of what we bring in at the box office and charitable contribution from individuals and corporations and foundations. On certain plays that have a real more epic in scope, like Diana, for instance, there's actually sometimes enhancing producers who we will partner with to be able to afford a show on this scale and scope, but very much a nonprofit theater.
And with the current Trump administration, I'll go there for a second, and he's talking about potentially cutting the arts, funding some of the funding to the arts. Is this going to affect you at all?
If the NEA was significantly cut, it absolutely would affect La Jolla Playhouse like every regional theater in the country. Even more though than I think all of us sometimes get a grant from the NEA. It's not a spectacularly large endowment compared to the gross national product, but symbolically super important to the NEA, right? Like the idea that arts are a crucial part of a richly lived life, and that they're going to be part of what we prioritize as a culture, that they're funded in the schools and arts and education. Those are so important to me, and I think so important to so many people in our audience, and so gently entrenched in the national conversation. That's the thing that gets discussed, getting slashed every single year, and it almost doesn't matter who's in the White House. There's the NEA is constantly up on the chopping block, as is NPR, as are a lot of arts funding at the national level. There's much less state funding than there was once upon a time in America. So, arts leaders like myself, I think, care passionately about public funding of the arts, and mostly care that Americans are encouraged to include art at the center of their lives. I think you and I and all the people in theater spend their lives in this sort of delightful, crazy sandbox of theater, because we think that telling stories matters, and that analyzing, discovering, understanding the human spirit and the current moment we're living in, and the community that comes together around art. A passion for that is, I think, why most of my friends do it. That's certainly why I'm in it.
It sounds very therapeutic.
Yes. I have a friend who's an art therapist, and I do actually think that what she does and what I do are not that far apart. That actually kind of touches back to what we were talking about 9/11, that people want to come through and come back together and find community and find a sense of belonging. So I totally see that. That makes sense. I definitely, there's a lot of very political material being created right now by playwrights. And I tend to gravitate toward the material that not just identifies a problem, because there's many right now in our world, but also tries to look at how might we bring people together to solve the problems. And I definitely think that that's one of the extraordinary, rewarding things about the time I've spent on Come From Away, is it's a story about community and the value of generosity, and what it's like to take care of each other. And I think that's at certain points in human history, that might seem like an optional message. And I'd say if you turn on the television news every night, that now seems like a necessary thing to talk about.
I would totally agree with that. And that is actually, I was going to segue into Come From Away, but you did it for me. So thank you. Come From Away, of course, is still playing on Broadway, is doing incredibly well, and just started a tour, right?
Yeah, we've actually got 4 companies up and running right now. There's 9 of the original 12 actors who are with it at La Jolla, Seattle, Ford's Theater, and Toronto on the way to Broadway are still in the Broadway company. And there's a all-Canadian acting company running in Toronto. And there's a national tour running around the U.S. and some Canadian cities. And as of 3 days ago, we just started previews for a West End UK company.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was the West End. So we're recording this February 1st. So through the magic of time travel, this will air later. So 3 days ago won't mean a lot. I always use the magic of time travel. It's a lot of fun. Magic of podcast time travel. But yeah, Come From Away. It tells an incredible story. And the first time I heard the concept, I said, well, they've made a musical out of 9/11. This is going to be really weird. And I went, and again, one of my all-time favorite musicals I've seen, and I've gone back and seen it several times. And it starts, and it's 90 minutes, and there's no intermission, and you barely have a chance to clap.
What you've just described is very much what we were going for, which is I think there's only 3 applause points in it. Other than that, it really is a train that keeps going. It's about the week starting on Tuesday, 9/11, when America shut its airspace and all the international flights that were in transit across the Atlantic and the Pacific had to ground somewhere, not in the U.S., and many of them landed in Canada. 38 flights landed in this tiny town in Newfoundland called Gander, which happens to have a big international airport left over from the days when you had to refuel to get across the Atlantic. So this town of 10,000 people suddenly had 7,000 visitors. And it's very much a story about just what happened in that week and how the people of that town, despite barriers of language, race, nationality, religion, really just stopped their lives and took care of these people from away, or the come from aways, as they call them in Newfoundland.
Mm-hmm.
I've now been working on that show for, I want to say, 5 years. It's one of the richest experiences I've ever had in the theater. It's an amazing story to tell. The true people who the stories are based on, really amaze and inspire me all the time. And they're very much with the production. I think Beverly Bass, the pilot, who's one of the people who was stranded there, was the first female pilot of a commercial airline in America. She was the first woman who flew for American Airlines. And I think she's seen the show 252 times as of last count. I think I've seen it more times, but not that many more. So the actual people are in our lives and are wherever we do it, they can sort of come and are part of the experience. And I've never had that experience before of doing a show where the show and real life keep on interweaving in that way.
I talked to Chad Kimball recently too, and he said something very, very similar. It's just that they're actual friends. The character, the people that they are recreating on stage are actually friends with these people.
Yeah, I'm in my office right now. There's a scarf that one of the real people knitted. There's kind of pictures and memorabilia from all the real people. They're also doing incredible things in their lives, kind of philanthropically, and raising money for Gander and for the schools there and the charities there. We had, on our way to Broadway, we stopped and did 2 concerts in the ice rink in Gander, which they turned into a giant refrigerator on the week of 9/11. And the experience of doing a show about a small town where the entire 2,500 person audience each show was the people of the town. So you're telling their story. And I've never had an experience like that where they went from like disbelief to like wild laughter to tears. And by the end of the show, about maybe 10 minutes before the end of the show, they just started to scream at the stage. There was this wall of sound coming at the show. And the actors were like doing the show like back to this wall of sound of like appreciation. It was one of the most emotional theater experiences I can imagine.
Wow. Oh man. Do you have any recordings of this or any footage of it?
There's lots of still footage. Yes, there's certainly clips from it, from that performance.
God, I would have loved to have seen that.
It was incredible. It was definitely a highlight. And even the the follow spots and the backstage sound guys, like everybody that you talk to, like that moment will come up and everybody will just start to well up because it was just the feeling in that room, and the way that a story mattered and was potent in that room at that moment was unforgettable.
And it's public now. It was announced back in November 2017 that there's plans to turn it into a feature film, yeah?
Yes, there absolutely are. No solid dates yet, but we're working toward a shoot that would do all of its exteriors in Gander itself, which will be really fun to do.
You gotta do like what Stan Lee did and like get the real people to kind of have cameos throughout the background.
I cannot speak about the state of the screenplay, which David and Irene have been working very, very hard on this year. But I think the real people will certainly be involved in some way.
I sure hope so. They should deserve to get something. They were incredible people. Are incredible people. They're
incredible people, and they're inspirational and also friends to everybody who's made that show.
Cool. So we'll wrap up here soon, and before we do, I want to quote you from an interview that you gave to Playbill in March 2018. You said, "There's nothing I would want to be doing now other than making theater. I think it's an extraordinary answer to some of the complicated fractures in our world right now." So on this, end quote, on this podcast, we find ourselves talking with, I talk with the guests a lot about the healing power of theater. And you and I even talked about, the community and the sense of belonging. What is it that you find about theater that you think is the extraordinary answer?
I think actors and playwrights are doing something incredible. The honesty that an actor brings to the table, the complete, every great piece of playwriting is an expression of that playwright's soul, worldview, and self. So these, like, everybody in theater is like putting themselves completely emotionally, vulnerably on the line. And that's in service of telling a story that's true about people and the world that we share. And that, it's like some Greek smart person said, what the proper study of man is man. I'm sure a butcher of that phrase. But the idea that, like, is there a better way to spend our lives than trying to understand who we are and what we're capable of? That seems to me like a really high purpose, and one that in a world that is as frustrating as the one we're living in right now, there's something so positive about trying to understand who we are.
Yeah.
That I said it in the quote, but I'll say it to you. I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing.
What would you like to see come out of the art form in the next few years?
Well, I love the immersive and site-specific work that's happening. We do at the Playhouse, we do a Without Walls festival of site-specific every 2 years. And I just think the artists who are challenging the boundaries between the audience member and the artist, that's such great work happening there. And it's not a new idea, right? I mean, the 70s had happenings, and there's been kind of street theater and public art forever. But the kind of ways in which the kinds of plays that are getting made, a lot of the impulses that are happening on the internet, this public art, it feels like a moment where art is not just for the elites. It's really, there's something radically democratic about it right now. And I think that's really exciting. I'm so impressed by the work that when Manuel was doing, like bringing Hamilton to Puerto Rico, both because that's a place that's very meaningful to him, and also he thinks that there's funding issues and political questions about Puerto Rico that are worth shining a spotlight on. I think the ways in which the theater is interacting with the exact moment of now is what's most exciting to me. And the theaters that are programming plays that have to be done right this year. And that could be really political plays, or it could be a story about a family, or a story about a potent story about an individual, but the idea that theater speaks to now, and theater speaks to the future that's just coming into being. That's the work that's really exciting to me.
I love that answer. That's beautiful. So the 3 standard questions that I normally ask all guests on the podcast here. First one is, what motivates you?
Telling a great story. Telling a story that matters.
And what advice would you give to your younger self and or younger people listening now, starting out down a similar path?
Listen to yourself, know what kind of stories are important to you, and don't let anything get in the way of telling them.
And last question here. If you could only see one show for the rest of your life, but you can see it as many times as you want, what show would you see?
Hamlet. I know that's like a really, really like old school answer, but having done one production of that play, I think I could do a new production of that play every year for the rest of my life and keep discovering radically new things in it. I think one of the reasons that Shakespeare has remained so constantly produced for so many centuries is that there's a resonance and a complication and a depth of characterization and metaphor and meaning that is rich to engage with as a director.
Wow. That's great. I thought you were going to say Hamilton, which several other people have said as well. But Hamlet, I would agree. That would be a great one to do. And I want to throw one.
We could do it. We could spend the rest of our lives in a repertory between Hamilton and Hamlet, like the Ham.
just the Ham Theater. But I want to throw one more.
You can only serve ham at the gift shop.
I want to throw one more question at you real quick that just popped in my head. Is there any actor or actress that you would love to work with that you never have, living or not?
Oh my God, I feel like I'm only giving the most standard answers, but who doesn't want to work with Meryl Streep? I never have, and I would consider myself fulfilled if I did. Also, Judi Dench. Those are 2 actresses that I think can do no wrong.
I would personally love to do anything with them as well. So those are good answers. So online, we should just connect with you at lajollaplayhouse.org. And can we make donations on the website there as well?
Absolutely.
Cool. So if you're here, if you listen to this now, you love supporting the arts, you love theater, go to lajollaplayhouse.org and please help support. And if you want more of me and the Theater Podcast, you can find me theater_podcast on Instagram and Twitter, facebook.com/official theater podcast. Of course, listen and subscribe via thetheaterpodcast.com. You can send me email feedback at thetheaterpodcast.com. This is produced by Jillian Hockman. And thank you as always to Jukebox the Ghost for our lovely podcast music. Christopher Ashley, thank you so much. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely.
Me too. I had a great time.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.